All right, welcome everyone to our panel on building products. We are joined here by three phenomenal leaders, Josh, Hongyi, and Crystal. And to kick us off, would love for each of you to speak about what teams and processes you overlook, as well as what is the first product that made you inspired to get into this industry.
Love it.
Josh, why don't you kick it off?
Yeah, so I'm Josh. I'm the head of design at SafetyCulture. So my team, thank you, Young. My team looks after research, product design, creative brand. Basically for us, it's every pixel you'll ever see. Our team takes a hell of a lot of time caring about that, which is really exciting. And I think product for me, I mean, I grew up in that era of enjoying the wonders of MSN, feeling like you're a hacker when you got to put music on your MySpace page, getting to play a real deep cut if you were kind of back then with like Mac Paint and kind of getting to paint patterns on things. But actually I think the moment for me that kind of changed my opinion of what this world could look like was probably something like Final Cut Pro. When I got to experience this piece of software that was hugely complex, like solving this really complicated problem. It was more than just like that MSN kind of tool, but this really powerful tool that started to unlock new functionality for businesses, for industries. That's when I thought there was something really exciting there, and how they had to try and do that simply with a set of really powerful tools. That was kind of where my journey, I think, began with it.
I like that hacking strategy. I'd have to say, well, first I'll answer the first question. My name is Crystal. In case I haven't met you, hello. I live in Singapore now. Please say hi. I was previously at Gojek, spent 5 years there as the first data hire, and then went on to build out the growth team, ran performance marketing, and a whole host of other things. But my favorite partner was always the design team and branding teams. But today I'm an advisor. I run product analytics and data for PMs on Reforge. Feel free to check that out. My next cohort actually starts in 2 weeks, so it's been a little crazy. What I do remember from what got me into product was my first time trying to edit a Zanga CSS HTML layout and learning that control copy and control paste was a thing, because I was on the phone, a flip landline phone, with a friend at the time, and they were like, "Why are you taking so long to copy my code?" And I was doing it the hard way, I was just typing line by line. And I was like, "Wow, this is so hard." But I learned a lot. I think Zanga and AOL and just all the old school messengers that gave you the freedom to code and hack around with small bits of hex code, or if you know how to use brackets. It was just really cool to invent stuff. I think Zanga would probably be my piece.
So hey everyone, my name's Hong. I'm the director of Open Government Products. We're an in-house development team in the Singapore government. We're made of engineers, designers, PMs, and all that. And we basically go around the government trying to identify things that should be built and build them and get people to use it. So stuff we build include sort of the go.gov links you might have seen everywhere in Singapore. We built the vaccination portal, the vaccination scheduling website during COVID. We built a sort of voucher distribution system for the government and various other things like that. So we've got 20 to 40 different products depending on how you slice it. What got me into product? I would have to say it was when I was interning as a PM on the Android team. This was a long time ago. And I was working on what would later become Google Keep. So at the time, iOS had a Notes app, and you're like, hey, Android should have a Notes app too. And me being still in school, I was like, sure, you're the intern, go figure out how to do this Notes app thing. And so I, not knowing anything about note-taking, just went to download 50 different note-taking apps from the App Store and just try every single one. And you sort of discover how even for something as simple as let's just do a simple Notes app, there's literally dozens and dozens of different ways and interpretations of how to do that. And that's what really got me thinking about different products and product that's sort of an art form.
Yeah. Okay, building off that, we're going to do a speed round. And each of you is going to say your favorite note-taking app today.
Ooh.
That's polarizing.
It's a very polarizing and revealing.
We're here for all the spicy questions.
I'm going to go for Notability, I think. It's got to be my top contender.
I'm going to say Apple Notes.
You've converted.
Classic, yeah.
To the dark side.
Whoa.
I recently moved from Obsidian, it was just too hard, to OneNote, and I'm still not sure.
Okay, amazing. Well, I know note-taking apps can be polarizing, but there's a nice, healthy, diverse array on stage.
It is
Safe
interesting
space.
that none of us use the exact same note-taking app.
I do use Apple
Yes.
Notes as well.
We'll
that
have to
one.
trade thoughts.
I'm gonna +1 for Apple Notes.
I walked all around the world and I tried Evernote, OneNote, and like went all the way around. And finally, I got back. I was like, actually, that wasn't much better. And I just like got back to home base.
Maybe you guys are just I'm on a shorter trajectory because I have yet to circle back to Apple Notes, but I'm feeling like that's probably where I'm
That's
going
where
to
you'll
end
end
up.
up.
Crystal's gonna walk off stage and open Apple Notes, and it's gonna
This will be the
great.
moment.
This is the
Trigger.
moment
Yeah.
you were waiting for.
You
Yeah.
realize eventually.
Alrighty, switching gears just a little bit, we're gonna hop into thinking about how you lead various product teams. And in particular, there are sort of two large things that you can use to motivate a product team and to help with decision making, and that's vision and data. And curious to hear from all of you how you think about the role that vision versus data plays in leading a team.
I have a strong opinion here in that I run data for PMs, but also a lot of designers are taking this class. And I like to tell them and remind people that the intuition that you have, it's coming from a certain vision, it's coming from something that you intuitively have sensed and feel like is needed in the product or in the world. But to make that case, you need data to be able to look up how am I wrong and how am I right? To what extent is this intuition or this vision true? I think that you can't have both, or you can't only have one or the other. Yes, I think one of the most common mental fallacies is this either or mindset, whereas I like to say, why not both?
For me, I think actually, you need both, obviously, as a sort of optimal process, but empirically, I found there's usually more of a lack of vision than there is a lack of data. So what I mean by that is that, as product people, right, as people are trying to build products, there is, firstly, a question of, what are you trying to do in the world? And I think most often the reason why most of the products I see fail are because the person just has a concept of, I want to make a successful product. And that is kind of like saying, I want to be rich and not knowing what you want to do. Or it's like, I want to make a really viral app, or I want to make a really good movie, but you have no concept. Because I think good product requires some concept of what state you want the world to be in if you are successful. And so, if you want to build a good, let's say, ride-hailing app, it's not just like, oh, I want it to be a viral ride-hailing app. You want it to help coordinate and solve the problem of people having to flag taxis on the road or something like that. And I think that's often missing because people say things like, I'll meet with different government agencies and they'll tell me, almost all of them will tell me they want a killer app. I want an app for the Land Transport Authority. I want an app for the Ministry of Health. I want the app for the Ministry of Education. It's like, what does it do? It's like, I know, just give me an app. And as a result, and you can see this, right? Because as a result of that, what happens is they end up doing this kind of product flailing, where they just shove every single feature in there, and every single feature you shove into the box has some degree of traction, and therefore they get into the mindset that if every individual feature has some traction, therefore the sum of the features must be better than the individual. And you often don't get to a good state. So you need to identify what is the product that you're trying to create, and then use data to help you converge towards that solution. But if you don't have that concept, then you get stuck in sort of data hell, where you get because every button you put is going to get clicked a little bit, and you therefore get into this feature hoarding mentality. Yeah. So the example I like to use for this is Pinterest. So I know Pinterest isn't as hot nowadays, but when it first came out, it obviously had strictly fewer features than Facebook. Strictly fewer features. And literally everything you want to do on Pinterest, you could do on Facebook. You could collect photos, you could put in albums, things like that. The difference wasn't whether or not they had more features or anything. The difference was that they had much clearer idea of what the app is trying to do. And once you have a clear idea of what it's trying to do, you can use the data to do the tuning and see where it's converging there, but you must have this concept of what is this form of something that should exist that does not exist yet? And I think that more often than not is the gap.
There's a lack of the ability to define a good objective function, I think, with this. In your mind what a good vision or a great product would look like, but your ability to define a proxy metric to create some objective function to work towards and see whether or not you are right, I do think is a harder task.
Yeah, I think it can be really hard to get good data right and get good vision right. You know, I think we can fall so easily into the trap. I know me as a designer, I do this a lot where it can be really easy to fall into the trap at looking at the data to like validate a decision you've already made. And even if you had all of the right intent to make a good decision and absolutely be driven by what the data is, like there's that cognitive bias that can kind of sit in you that even if the data told me something, am I going to change my mind? I think it's really easy for us to fall into that trap when we talk about looking at that data and helping that really drive our decisions. And I think it's the same with good vision. When it's vision without purpose, it tends to be meaningless. And I found more than ever when we're trying to define that vision, when we're trying to really look at that world and see what that would look like, that's the kind of superpower that every designer is bringing to their team, which is that ability to turn what you're thinking about, what you're talking about, everyone that kind of walks out of this meeting having had this conversation, feeling like we're really aligned. And then all of a sudden, like you see a screen a few weeks later, and you're like, oh no, we were talking about something totally different. That ability for designers to kind of help shape and show that way is really critical. But I think when you're trying to define really good vision, good vision feels like something that's almost unachievable. Something that feels so big, so exciting, so much bigger than what you kind of thought it could be, that everyone gets a little bit nervous about, are we going to be able to make that real? Like, that feels really hard to do. And I think that's what creates enough room for teams to innovate, to get really excited about stuff, and then to let themselves be driven by the data to make that come real.
Yeah. So let's double click a little bit on that big vision and also on what Hong said in terms of more often than not, you find teams lacking in great vision versus enough data. And so what is your advice for teams that are sort of in search of that North Star and that vision?
The way I would put it is that you need to make sure you don't mistake ambition for vision. And this is like, I think, a very common thing, because people, when they say visionary, they're like, oh yes, we shall have a big app, and this app shall have chat and social and payments and a wallet and like a calendar and a scheduling, and like you see so
and
like
notes.
And
exactly and notes and like and it's a very common failure mode, and I think it's a very common failure mode that people who don't work on product don't understand. Like once you work on product, it's the analogy I give, it's a bit like opening a restaurant, right? Like if you open a restaurant, and your friend told you I was opening a restaurant, and it's like, what food are you going to serve? It's like, oh, we're going to do everything. We're going to do Italian, we're going to do Indian, we're going to do French food, we're going to do Russian food, we're going to do like whatever. Like, you know that's going to fail. You know that. There's no way you can run the logistics. There's no way you can maintain the quality. But the argument for that is like, no, but isn't it better if there's one restaurant you could go to that had everything you wanted? And I see this as a product pitch like almost all the time. And what they have is they don't have vision, they just have ambitions. Like, I want to be the big super app that everyone in the world uses, and then I'll be a billionaire, and I can control the world and save it and somehow. But that's not vision, that's just, you know, you watch too many Saturday morning cartoons. A vision is more of a clarity of what is the structure of the machine, of how the world operates, and therefore what is the difference in the structure that you can create that is a sustainable change to how it works. So, I mean, taking something like Figma, right? Like the vision for Figma is not like we want to be the super app that everyone uses on their computer. The vision of Figma is like we want to make like tools that designers can use better. We want to make like it much easier for you to express the concept in your mind onto the page. The concept for Uber is like, you know, it's not like we want to take over the world. The concept is we want to solve rides, hopefully. And I think that tends to be the issue, which is that you cannot have vision independent of the substrate of the world that you are working in. You have to have a concept of how the world operates, and therefore have a concept of how it could operate differently, and your vision is how to drive it along that path. Not this idea of like, hey, I'm going to one day be a billionaire and I'm going to do a crypto thing and like, you know, the world's going to use my stuff. Why is your stuff better? I don't know, but people are going to use it. And that, I think, is usually the biggest mistake. Yeah.
I think one of the things that's been really important to us as a company, our customers are not the normal customers sitting in offices that we all kind of feel really familiar with. Our customers are those real frontline workers that are out there in incredible environments, really complex and often hostile working environments trying to deal with technology. And so it's the plumbers, it's the electricians, it's the miners, it's these people that are climbing up wind turbines and keeping our energy going. And so designing technology for them is a really interesting problem space. And I think something that's been integral to how we look at the vision, how we kind of find purpose for our teams, is making sure all of our teams, and that's not just exclusive to the designers, but they all get to go out there and meet those customers and actually spend time in that world. Because what we've found is that no amount of data that says, this button isn't clicked well enough, or the kind of acquisition rates aren't quite where we wanted them, or even just beautiful designs, is kind of what bonds that team together, that motivates that team to work on something that they care deeply about. Like that thing that gets them out of bed in the morning is often the people that they actually met. When you got to meet them, know them personally, like understand what they did in their day and realize the impact of what their world looks like. When you're up a wind turbine and it's 100-kilometer-an-hour winds and it's like negative temperatures and you're trying to do your job well, that's the kind of stuff that I think motivates a team. And I think making sure not just design or product get to kind of go and do that research, but you actually get to take your engineers out there. That context that you get to build as a team, that shared context that kind of carries with you now throughout the rest of that project, is almost invaluable. Because you don't have to sit there and kind of internally pitch to each other, like, this is why we're doing it, and this is the purpose of it, and you kind of constantly have to answer those questions of the why, and what are we doing this for, and why do we do it that way? When everyone got to see that, and got to see Jason 100 meters up in the air, hanging onto this thing by like a thread, you're like, yeah, we know why. Let's just make that better. And I think finding that purpose for us has really been spending time with our customers face to face in those environments has been one of the most invaluable things that's a part of our rhythms as a team.
So let's say, you've gone out there and you've done the research, you rallied your team behind vision, not ambition. How do you then, in the face of new data and new information, retain the ability to innovate and to perhaps deviate from that path that you once charted out for yourself?
Well, when you have clarity and you know that you've done the math correctly, the physics don't change when you encounter new data, right? The physics of the world, the business model that you understood, the vision that you had in your mind of the world that you operate in, those are the physics. And usually I'll have a founder come to me and be like, I just launched this test for this experiment, and I expected great conversion, but actually it's very bad. I just have to shut down my startup. And I'm like, you tried once, and I don't know, maybe the experiment wasn't run very well. Maybe the copy was bad. Have you tried again? And for me to kind of provide that guidance is really pushing this Bayesian mindset of, okay, you have a stack of data, all of this experience that you've had for many weeks, months, years working on this product. You encounter a new data point. What do? You don't just like inception your way through your physics model. You just add on top of what you already understand your business to do and for how your customers react. And that iteration, I think, helps to, it requires us to be calmer, more calm, and present about, okay, to what extent does this data change my reality? Can I appropriately and proportionally adjust my strategy in relation to that? And if you consistently see the same effect, I like to play, like, in terms of casino games, I guess it would be win, stay, lose, shift. If you win and you continue winning, you can stay at that slot machine or that product problem. But if you start to lose and you're losing continuously, you should probably shift to another problem, iterate again.
For me, I think the way I think about it is that you have to realize that we're really dumb. Like,
yes.
Yes. Humans' ability to basically the way I think about it is that you have to identify the difference between things that sound like they work and things which actually do work in that Venn diagram. And as complexity increases, things that sound like they work expands, and things that actually do work shrinks. And so from a pure geometric argument, if you imagine two circles similar size, if complexity, let's say, doubles, and the sounds like they work expands, and the things that work and actually work shrinks, you end up seeing that a very, very small percentage of things that sound like they work actually do work. For our team, what we do, our primary product discovery process is, at the start of every year, we do a month-long hackathon, and at the start of hackathon, there's probably 100 different ideas people are throwing around. At the end of hackathon, in terms of final presentations, you're looking at 20 to 30 different products. If you're looking about mid-year, after that, what products have actually made it to production, probably about 5. like less than that. So even for a team of professional engineers, designers, and PMs all working who have done this for years, you're looking at like a 5%-ish yield for good ideas. And so this is where your vision combines with like your data, where you start out, you just have to span a whole bunch of things. And when you know that number, if you're thinking that like, oh, I need to work really hard, but there's a 70% chance I'll succeed, then you double down a lot. Whereas when you realize there's a 5% chance of succeeding, you know how to fail fast. Like you have a whole bunch at the end of like people explore a bunch of stuff, but at the end of hackathon, a whole bunch of ideas that sounded good but like didn't actually work out. Like you have about 20 left, and when you actually try to bring it to production, you realize like, yeah, there's a traction problem or there's a communication problem or something, and you can revisit them later, but you realize that it is an exploratory rather than a intellectual process. You are not, like, no amount of sitting and thinking and like hard braining it is going to get you to understand. You have to use the real world to help you simulate outcomes, and your ability to do good product is your ability to simulate at lowest cost with highest information as possible. So yeah, I don't know if that like is assuring to anyone, but like you just have to accept that you're dumb and you're going to have, and it's exploratory and you are going to make a bunch of mistakes and going to have to try a bunch of things that don't work out.
And I think on that, for every designer that's in the room, and I think you guys live by this mantra as well, so much around show, don't tell. You know, the quicker you can show that thing you were talking about, the quicker that like little idea, like when I finished climbing this wind turbine and it was a crazy day, the first thing I did when I got back into the car as we're going back to the hotel is I flicked open Figma and I started designing a page because it was fresh in my mind, because getting that down onto paper, getting that down into screens, getting that into something we could all look at was so much more powerful. You know, you always see that the moment you start to show screens, it changes the conversation. And so I think that ability to iterate, to try, to explore, and to do it while it's fresh. Like not wait to like write that down in notes. We'll go through a few meetings. We'll figure out like whether the data says this is something, like just turn it into a screen straight away so we can look at it, see. It doesn't have to be a perfect screen. It doesn't have to be all of the things answered in one go. But as you do that more and more and more, you find that like 5% that's going to be the sweet spot of where you'll find traction.
And it's almost like an internal hackathon for yourself.
Yeah.
Like you are doing the show, literally I was doing this just earlier today, just poring over how could this look like? What could this be? And then you are disproving to yourself like, oh, the thing that I thought would be really simple actually turns out to be really hard to do visually or hard to design for. And I really like this hackathon mentality and this mindset of showing yourself, but also to show other people, the 5% that worked.
Yeah, because it's really easy to have that like list of things we need to do on the page, or even that wireframe that kind of has all of the functions we need to perform. But the moment you go and like put some real UI on there and put some real buttons in there, you're like, oh, that's now feeling a fair bit different to what we thought, and you start to change the conversation really quickly.
Yeah, definitely. And so, Josh, earlier you were sort of alluding to how in order to get people to truly feel, in order to do the research, to kind of build a conviction in these various directions, you need not only maybe the designer there, the researcher there, but the engineers there, the product folks there. You need everyone there in order to really internalize the problems that they're solving. And so curious to hear from all of you, as leaders in your organization, how you set the tone for cross-functional product development.
I've actually taken a lot of the design team's practices. Designers are amazing at being self-critical and criticizing each other in design crit. Like I learned when I was running Kumu, that the product team there, that this is an actual thing. A bunch of designers will get around and tell each other what's wrong with their designs. And I was like, we don't really do that as product managers. Engineers kind of do it with code review and code pairing, but it's not really a holistic thing. One of the processes there that we did was to record all of our design crits, so there's kind of a stake in everyone participating, and then also just rolling it out across product as well. So if we have a whole PRD, it's not just the product documentation and designs that get critiqued, it's kind of what is this overall user experience and where do we think it'll go wrong? If it does fail, kind of like a pre-mortem. If this fails, if this product flops, what do we think would have caused it to flop? And anyone can contribute here. And the question being forced is, it's going to fail. And so no one has to feel bad about being like, hey, I don't think this thing will work. It's, oh, I was asked, and so I'm prompted to give an answer to this. And then the last question I really like is, what is the elephant in the room that we are not talking about when it comes to this product or this design or this hypothesis? What assumptions have we made that it feels like no one wants to talk about? And then suddenly you hear everyone's like crazier thoughts around, we know that this service will take 3 months to build because we're on microservices, not monoliths, unfortunately. Just a whole host of all of the things that you wouldn't have known cross-functionally, you get to learn in these experiences and see what makes it hard in engineering versus what makes it hard in design.
I think little rhythms for us that have become really important. I mean, I think we encourage our teams to really build together, right? It's kind of everyone is in Figma in that ideation stage. We're playing around with stuff in FigJam. We already have converted half of our stuff to Figma slides as well, which we're super excited about. But for us, it's 80% of our organization is kind of in Figma building together. And I think that's a really important part of that kind of collaboration process for us. But that design isn't kind of handing over to engineers is a really critical part of it. And I think one of the things we really encourage in our teams is that there isn't a set set of responsibilities in that triad of what that should look like. We want all of our teams to kind of have that autonomy to find the rhythms and the processes that work for them, because there's huge overlap between where kind of design and product and engineering all kind of add value to this. And we have some incredible designers that really good with code and really good with that technical understanding. We have designers that are amazing kind of visual explorers, and product people that are some of the best, researchers in the world. And so for finding that balance of what works for their team, how they can kind of use their best skills, their own strengths to not only build an incredible team, but kind of further all of their own careers, all of their own work that they're doing and learn from each other. Making sure our teams have autonomy to kind of find those ways of working is really critical. I think for them to be able to kind of have that space to innovate, to explore, and to kind of define what that future should look like for them.
I do find that the most collaborative teams, you can tell a lot by their Slack channels, how collaborative they are. The proportion of private channels versus open public channels tells you a lot.
Ooh. You can guess which is which. And so kind of looking forward and thinking about how teams operate, especially cross-functionally, as we move into a world of more AI, amongst other things, increased efficiency gains, how do you envision cross-functional collaboration changing looking into the future?
That's a good one. I mean, I think one of the things that is on the horizon for us when we think about what this future landscape looks like is that the bar just keeps getting higher. With every great product out there, now if you wanted to release a phone to market, you don't get to release like the thing that can make calls and like browse the web. You have to meet all of the standards of all of the flagship products that exist. And so that first product to market, every single time, that bar just gets higher and higher and higher. And so that's kind of the reality that we deal with as far as the future of product development is the bar is really, really high. You have to meet that kind of industry standard almost out the gate. And I think that's one of the biggest things that'll kind of challenge us more and more is we have this right now we're hoping to release a document management kind of feature, a kind of Google Drive inside of our platform. And so you kind of don't get to just do that with like the first little feature and think that'll be good enough. You kind of have to do it with the expectations of there's Drive and SharePoint and all of these other things that we kind of have to have on day one for this to be really functional. But for us to go and do this compared to others to use Drive, it's this combination of when you become a product that turns into a platform, it's how all of these things add together that kind of changes the game for you. That every new feature that you're adding, every new thing that, yes, there's a lot of other products out there, when you add them into your product, it's not just 1 + 1 = 2, it's that value kind of compounds with everything that you build. The really practical example for us with Drive and a document management system was we have companies that'll manage all of their assets, they'll do massive inspections, they kind of monitor things in real time with sensors and like telematics and all this kind of stuff. And so just a standalone document management feature wasn't particularly exciting. But what we found was that they'll often have 150 forklifts in there, and trying to manage the service manual on 150 forklifts is a horrendous process. You have to upload it 150 times, and then all of a sudden if the service manual changes, now you've got to do it all over again. And so now all of a sudden having an internal document management system that can populate that across every single feature, all in real, the value for a customer is kind of compounded. And I think that's where we'll see more and more of these products that evolve into platforms, and platforms really finding that value is that kind of compound of those things combined. It's really tricky to nail, and it's really hard because our attention to detail needs to be better than ever. Experience is always kind of king with that stuff, and the bar is kind of higher than ever. And so I don't think we're running out of jobs anytime soon with AI. I think there's so much work to do there, but it's incredibly exciting.
I think we're all learning to do each other's jobs a little bit these days. So anyone who has tried to make an image or tried to design their app using generative AI, or tried to see what the engineering code would look like if they only had access to it and could generate this code, and everyone is learning that it's actually much harder, and our teammates are much smarter than we gave them credit for, perhaps. But I think that the floor, to Josh's point, has gotten much higher, that for me to come up with a vision and then generate some image to help represent that will be fairly easy. And so design will need to become increasingly differentiated and polished and opinionated, I think, because a lot of AI is less opinionated than I think we give it credit for. It is the summation of average, which frankly is pretty meh. If you look at the median design quality, it's not great, it's not opinionated, it doesn't have personality or character, and that's something that I like to look at and look for in my products. Is it had empathy to work with engineers, work with designers, product managers. They came together with all of these talents in a very opinionated way, and what they produced was something actually interesting and new. And I don't think that AI will help with the innovation part. It will help with generation, and I think that helps generate better innovative ideas. But I still believe that anyone who has tried to ask generative AI to make some design or tweak a design knows that it completely fails at the details, and the details are what matter in a great product.
All right, and leading into our final question for today, what are the emerging trends that you think will change the way your teams are working in the next 1 year and even 5 years?
Beyond remote work, seems like that was the. I feel like there's so many trends now, I can't keep up.
For my team, at least, I think the major shift, and maybe not so relevant here, is that I think more governments are recognizing the importance of technology and what they do. So when I first started working on this about 10 years ago, I came back from working at Google, and when I talk to people about we should modernize this and modernize that, people are like, why? This is just how government works. That's the way it is. But now I think the Singapore government, at the very least, is quite sort of decided that you must have technology in order to build a better government. And happily enough, I think that also is simultaneously happening in the region for Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia. We're working with the Vietnamese as well, and that everyone is realizing that in order to improve how government works, you must use technology. And I think that is something that has not been assumed before, because I think we've been doing this sort of modern democratic kind of paradigm for quite a few decades now, and you can talk about taxing this more, subsidizing this a bit more, and shifting some programs here and there, but fundamentally, you can't have government operate very much differently from what it does today without fundamentally automating and using data and to do a lot of things that we weren't doing before. And that is going to dramatically shift, I think, how we operate. So the idea here is that your public policy space dramatically shifts because of the advent of new technology. So for example, one of the things that we're building is a sort of voucher distribution system for the government to give out grants. I don't know if people know this, but when the government gives out money, it turns out to be a huge logistics exercise. It takes months and months to plan, it takes months and months to do. And because of that, it can only perform fiscal policy at these sort of macro steps. But if you have a turnkey solution where the government can send out vouchers with the same efficacy, companies can send out like coupon codes or something like that, then suddenly the way you conduct fiscal policy converges from this macro structure to this micro fiscal policy thing, where you can do like a big, broad sort of distribution, identify what groups are missing, and then like catch up with there. Similarly, if you're talking about like enforcement, right? For a lot of the teams, the regulatory regime, for example, around like banking and like various other things, was designed in the situation where we assumed that all government had to be like big reams of paper and people noting things down, and therefore some things were just not doable. But now that you sort of embrace that, like actually you can do this differently, this opens up not just the technology space to like fill in your forms online, but it opens up a whole bunch of new policy space as well. So for example, when we were doing the COVID vaccinations for Singapore, one of the big things that we did was we did it based on an invite model. So rather than just like opening up the appointments and then everyone rushing to like try and sign up and doing that frantic fastest finger first, what we did was we like looked at how much supply of vaccines we had, and then we sent out that many invites to the people who were most vulnerable first, and then as the invites got taken up, like you adjust and you send out more. In the private sector, this is extremely well known. Like this is obviously how you control demand in private sector and like thing. In the public sector, this was like a novel way of doing things, but it allowed you to conduct a far more even vaccination program than if you didn't. And that, I think, is the biggest trend, at least for me.
I think as I look to the future, I think there is probably one thing that I think will always remain true that will be in our kind of future no matter what, and I think there's one thing that's probably going to be new for us. I think when I look at probably the next 5 to 10 years, I think we're going to enter this era of the aggregators. I mean, we've already started to see this so much with all of the AI tools that are out there. Like, there's AI tools out the wazoo now. There's so many of them, and what you're starting to see is actually people don't care about having 150 different AI tools. What they want to do is see how all of those come together to just, I don't have to interface with 150 different tools. And I think as we see more and more companies produce more and more similar tech, similar problems, kind of niche solving, all of this kind of stuff, what we'll start to see over the next 5 to 10 years is that kind of aggregators will start to become king in a lot of these spaces. But I think one of the things that will always be true for us is that design has a lifespan and it's pretty short. Like, you probably get about 18 months out of something that feels like great design before it starts to feel like old design. All it takes is, the next iOS update or Android update for your app to kind of now feel a little bit kind of old school and a little bit out of date. And so I think what was always true, and I think will continue to be true for us, is that experience is king. And it's not something you get to stop investing in. It's something that changes constantly, that kind of starting to predict those changes, foresee those changes, build for those changes gets harder and harder as businesses go, because it's harder for you to make reactive changes within a month or two for a new design element, because all of a sudden shadows are out and we want to now have stitching back around our buttons and things like that. Those trends will always change and they always kind of go in cycles, and I think that will always be true for us. And so I don't think you ever get to stop designing, which will be really powerful.
Incredible. Well, on that note, Josh, Hong, Crystal, thank you so much for that very insightful and inspirational panel.